Did you know that a group of Viking women once traded beer for a venomous snake? Let me tell you this crazy story and more about these legendary seafarers. You might think of fierce warriors and longboats, but there's much more to know. I'm here to bring you the craziest and the best from human history. So let's dive in. The Viking raids began in 793 AD when a band of Scandinavian warriors attacked the famous monastery of Lindisfarne in England. This wasn't some random act. It was part of a huge shift in history. For over 200 years, Vikings from modern-day Norway, Denmark, and Sweden went on an expansion spree. These warriors were known as Vikings, but that wasn't really their name. It's what other Europeans called them since it sounded similar to the Old Norse word Vikingur, meaning someone who goes on a raid. To the Vikings, they were just regular people going about their lives. But why did they go on these famous raids? Well, back then in Scandinavia, most people worked as farmers or fishermen. They had enough food to eat and didn't have to worry about famine. But there was one problem: not enough land to go around. As more and more people were born, some families had to move out and look for new homes elsewhere. And that's when the Vikings started heading out to sea. Their ships were amazing and could travel fast. So they'd quickly get to faraway places and then zoom back home before anyone knew what hit them. Speaking of their ships, they were so cool. These longboats were awesome because they had shallow bottoms so they could go into rivers and small lakes. At the same time, they were big enough to handle the waves of the ocean, allowing the Vikings to travel pretty much anywhere they wanted. But don't be fooled by their looks. Those Vikings weren't afraid to use those cute little oars for battle. Once they found a target, they'd get out their weapons, jump into action and attack. They went after monasteries first because they had lots of shiny stuff like gold and silver. Plus, monks didn't fight back. It was until the Vikings got bored with easy targets that they started attacking villages and coastal towns. And guess what? They weren't just looking for treasure, they also wanted power. The Viking raiders became like superstars of their time. Imagine being famous throughout Europe for your daring raids and scary looks. That's what these guys were after. And let me tell you, they earned that reputation. They showed up in places like the British Isles, France, the Mediterranean, even North Africa and the Baltic Sea. Anywhere that had valuables and didn't expect a visit from these tough Vikings, they'd go there. But wait, I said they were going after treasure, right? Well, the Vikings weren't all about pillaging and plundering. Yep, they were merchants too. They had a massive trading network that stretched from the Middle East to the Arctic Circle. Wow, that's quite a journey. They exchanged all sorts of goods, including furs, amber, slaves, and silver. Along the way, they picked up new ideas, inventions, and stories that they brought back home. Some even settled in the places they visited, like in England, Ireland, France, and Russia. They mixed their own culture with that of the locals and created something totally unique. Now, not all Vikings were hardcore warriors or adventurous traders. Most of them were regular folks trying to live their lives. They worked as farmers, craftsmen, and traders. They hung out in villages and towns, minding their own business. So the next time you hear about Vikings, remember they were regular people too. When you picture a Viking, you probably imagine a big, burly warrior with a thick beard and a helmet with horns. But where did that image come from? Well, the truth is, most historical evidence doesn't support it. The horned helmet thing seems to have started as a misunderstanding. Back in the 1800s, archaeologists found a burial mound with a helmet shaped like a hat with two horns on top. They thought it was a Viking helmet, but now we know it was from a later Germanic group. As for the whole big and scary Viking look, well, that's mostly propaganda spread by their enemies. When you in the middle of a battle and your opponent is charging towards you with a sword, they wouldn't exactly look like a gentle giant. They'd seem like a big, bad monster. And don't forget, the Vikings weren't just fighters, they were also skilled farmers, craftsmen, and traders. They grew crops like barley and rye, raised animals, and made their own clothes and tools. In fact, most of them lived on farms and worked as farmers. But if you were a Viking farmer, you wouldn't be stuck on your field all day. Your family probably owned a farm and you had plenty of workers to help out. So you could take a break and join a raiding party or a trading expedition. Just think about it. After a long day of plowing fields, you'd love to get off work and go on an adventure. Now let's talk about Viking women. They weren't just stay-at-home moms, they played a big role in society. While men were off fighting or traveling, women managed the farms and businesses. They also wove clothes, took care of animals, and prepared food. Plus, they had more rights than women in other places. For example, they could own property and even divorce their husbands if they wanted to. Now, this doesn't mean that Viking women didn't get married, they totally did. Marriage was a big deal back then, and most women got hitched. But if things didn't work out, they had the option to end it. Also, if a woman wanted to own a farm, she could do that too. Next, let's talk about Viking religion. They worshipped a bunch of gods and goddesses, each with their own special powers. Odin was a big deal. He was like the main god and was super smart. He was also a bit grumpy, but hey, no one's perfect, right? Thor was another popular god. He was the god of thunder and was always ready to protect the Vikings from harm. Freya was a goddess that people prayed to for love and beauty. Now, Vikings believed in an afterlife too. They thought that when they died, they'd go to a place called Valhalla. To get there, they had to be a good and brave Viking. And no, they didn't believe in vampires. That's just a spooky story made up by their enemies, but you know what? Even though the Vikings were tough and fearless, they still had some superstitions. They were afraid of witches, ghosts, and evil spirits. But the scariest thing for them was getting a bad omen. If something bad happened, they thought it was a sign from the gods that they should go on a certain trip or start a battle. So now let's talk about how the Viking Age ended. Well, there isn't a clear-cut answer, but historians think it wrapped up sometime in the 11th century. By then, the big kingdoms in Europe had grown stronger and built up better defenses, making it harder for the Vikings to sneak in and steal stuff. Plus, Scandinavia itself was changing. More and more people were becoming Christians, and the different tribes were coming together to form bigger, stronger kingdoms. And in 1066, the English beat a Viking army at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. Many historians see this as the last big battle of the Viking Age. From then on, the Vikings didn't go on as many raids and the age came to an end. So the next time you hear about Vikings, remember they weren't just scary warriors or ruthless plunderers. They were regular folks trying to make a living and make their way in the world. Sure, they had their own unique culture and way of life, but they were still human. And hey, they accomplished some pretty amazing things. They explored new lands, traded with faraway people, and left behind a rich legacy that we're still discovering today. Thanks for watching. Remember to subscribe for more fascinating history.